Okay, so in this video, we're in part 3 now of writing an SDK with RPG. We're going to take a look at the Punk API and decide what APIs we should create. Now, it's important to know here about this API it's actually fairly simple. Really, it's this URL and it's just /biz. That's really the API that we're going to work with. So, for example, we can actually just open this up in Chrome here. It's just a simple GET request and it returns a JSON set. Now, by default, /biz returns every beer in the dataset. Now that's quite big. We don't really need that much. So luckily, they do also add pagination, but I don't think we're going to implement this in the API right away. But what we will do is add there's a per page option. And I think we'll just make it say 10 for now because we don't really need that many. So we'll just make it 10. That's good to know. Now, you can also pass in many other query parameters. So as well as page and per page, we can also pass in returns all beers with ABV greater than a certain amount. Or beer name. I like beer name because you can just do a string search of beers. There's also yeast, percentage, brewed before, brewed after, dates. Very useful, very cool stuff. You can also search the food that not that it contains, but the similar foods that it eats well with, if you like. But there's lots of query parameters that we can play with, and this will play a part later in the series. So the important part here is that to get a single beer by ID, it's just beers / then the ID. So there'll be a procedure to get a beer by an ID. There's also a way to get a random beer, so you just call /random. And every response is the same, so it just returns an array every time. And each item in the array is an object, and each object is effectively a single beer. Each beer has an ID, a name, a tagline, first brewed, description, so on and so forth. It also has things like the volume, so the percentage volume, what percent is obviously alcohol. We have the value in unit, which is the property of the volume. Has a list of ingredients, again, which is its own object as well. Has food pairing, which is a string array. How cute. I really like this API. It's a lot of fun to work with. And then brewery tips. This is a very good API because there's lots of data that we can play with here. So what we're going to do is write just some of the kind of APIs that we might use or might create in our service program. So I've highlighted 2 open here, and I'm going to go ahead and open up Punk API, QRPGLE source, and I'm just going to go ahead and open up the source member here. So the very first thing, it is going to be free, as in completely free format, and we're going to give it a control opt no main. Of course, this is a service program, and of course binding directory Punk API. Now we'll talk about that in a second, and let's just make a very simple test procedure. Export and proc. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And of course, while it's saving, we need to make sure that Punk API, the binding directory, is going to be on our library list. So you can come over to settings, go over to library list, and you should see that Punk API is on there. That's very, very important that it's on there, of course, to reach our binding directory. And from our editor, we should be able to compile this as a module. And I have create SQL RPG mod as an option. I can hit the mod, and it does successfully compile a very simple service program. Doesn't do anything right now, of course, but that's okay. Now, all I wanted to create this for right now was to get an idea of what APIs we're going to create in our service program. So, of course, the important one, well, there's a few. Let's, I think our API will have the prefix beers, because who doesn't like that? Let's do some simple stuff. Let's say the first one is, let's just do beers get, and by default that returns the same API call as get. So the one that we have here, it just calls this API and returns the JSON result set. Very simple. Then perhaps we could have one to search. I think searching is good. So why don't we use the same beers get but allow paging? Not paging, a search. So we could put beer name. That could be a string. We could pass it in and allow the user to search by beer name. Then we could also add paging. So why didn't we do something like beers get, and then the parameters, again, it would allow beer name. It could also be blank, so it doesn't search, but we could also say page and then per page. So we could add those as parameters also. And I think that's a pretty straightforward get API, actually. I think that's a really nice get API. So we'll stick with that. That's awesome. That's going to be our get API. Now, what's important is how we actually get the data out of the response. But actually, we probably should add an API to get a single beer. So we're going to say beers, beers dot get ID. We'll just call it get ID, and then we'll allow beer ID as the parameter. Okay, and then of course we need to be able to get the data out. So it returns an array. We're going to need to have a function like beers dot count where we pass in the array. And of course the get API beers get returns JSON pointer. So NoxDB, what we'll do is we'll pass the JSON into NoxDB, and NoxDB will give us a pointer, an array. And then beers count, where we pass in the pointer, returns count from get API call. Fairly simple. So then we have a count. We will know how many the response returns, and then we're going to have to do something like beers underscore element at, and then we'll say that will be the pointer to the array. In fact, we'll call it array pointer. And this will, then we can give it an index, that will be another parameter, and this will return a current element pointer. Okay, PTR is what I wanted. So beers element at will get the specific object, at that point. Fairly simple. And then of course we can do fairly simple things. So we should say beer dot string at is a very important one, where we pass in the current element pointer, and then we pass in the property that we want. Property, fairly simple. Then of course we can add, nicer APIs. So these are the generic ones that we can use, but we can add things like beers get ID. So, or we could say beer. That would be better. Beer dot get ID. Beat beer get ID, and then we'll pass in the current element pointer, and that will return what looks like a number. Returns number. So we just do a little bit of API planning right now. And then of course we could do beer.getName. Beer get name, not .getName. And this is where we'll pass in the current element pointer again. And that returns what does it return? A string, or a character field, or a varying length character field in our case. And then of course there's more. Tagline, current element pointer, returns string. Now we could do a few more. Let's do, so first brood is interesting. So by default it's a string, but we could actually make it return a date. That could be really fun. So let's say beer get brew date. Oh, I have a get beer get brew date. Current element pointer, returns date. So of course this date only has a month and a year, so we'll just make the day the 1st, for example, and then we'll just do a couple more, and then maybe we'll talk about some more later. The last one we'll do is return description. So get beer. No, I did get. This is going to be beer. Get brew date, beer underscore get description, and that will return the current element. Gives us the current element pointer, and it returns a string. Okay, so this is the APIs that we're basically going to write for our SDK. So it's really simple, actually. It doesn't do a ton. It's really very simple, and I love that. I love simple APIs. They're the best kind of APIs, and this is what our SDK is going to do. Now, I think that's everything we're going to do for this video, and then in the next one, we're actually going to start writing some of the underlying pieces of work that we need to do. Obviously, the first being beers underscore get. So, see you for that video.